Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 10 of Liberty Inc. My name is Rob Yates, currently on vacation at the beach, and I'm the Communications Director of the LPNC. If you have watched us before, thanks for playing along, and if you have not, try and watch some of our other episodes. We've got a great season this go around and a great group of guests. On today's episode, Ryan Brown will be interviewing Mike Maat, a Virginia Libertarian running for president in 2024. After that, Trevor Miles and Joshua Glawson will join the panel, and we will continue to ask a few more questions of Mike. Then, as always, thanks for tuning in, and if you have any questions or comments, please email them to communications@lpnc.org. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Rob Yates, the Communications Director of the Libertarian Party of North Carolina.
And I approve this message.
And I'm really glad my wife doesn't believe in divorce because she's still hot and I really let myself go.
And I will sleep with the queen even though she's dead and long gone.
Hey, I'm actually Dee and this is Angela.
Yeah, that's right. We're not Rob, but he's on vacation. We're just making fun of him today. We're here today to talk about
women's sports and guns.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Do you want to get it started?
You start it.
You messed up.
Okay, we're here today and there was an interview by Representative Marcia Mori, and she was on
a podcast called Under the Dome that is put on by the News and Observer. So they did about a 22-minute interview with Representative Mori, a Democrat out of Durham, NC, and discussing the controversial bill, House Bill 574, which is short titled Fairness in Women's Sports. And it made headlines for quite a while in, I think, May. Was that when it first came out?
We're going to play a clip from Under the Dome, the News and Observer podcast, so that you can hear the section we're talking about.
About that. So I mentioned at the start, of course, that people are probably already familiar with you as being a Democrat, being from Durham. Maybe not the Olympics, that comes up sometime. So for anyone that didn't know that you competed in the Olympics, tell us about that.
Ancient history. It was 1976 in Montreal. And you can see I have no medals, so I am working the rest of my life to make a living.
Well, you're the only one, and maybe ever in the legislature that's competed in the Olympics?
I have no idea.
Anyone else, yeah. Well, let's segue immediately to legislation then. What did you think about the Women in Sports Bill?
You know, Don, that's a tough one, because when I did compete in 1976, the East German women had all been given male hormones, testosterone, to improve their performance. And it was shown they had an unfair advantage because they had years of this steroid treatment and injections. So the women's sports bill kind of hit home to me because we were defeated by East Germans in every event except one by substantial margins because of performance-enhancing drugs. I felt that the nature of the combination of these bills were all anti-LGBTQ. I think they were mean-spirited. I think the High School Association had a good way to monitor, to oversee applications for athletes to participate in sports. I think the key is participation in sports does so much for someone's development, and especially the middle school and the high school. And so I was opposed to that bill. I still am. The governor has vetoed it, and we'll see if there's an override. But I think participation in middle and high school, it's not the world-class level. It's not the Olympic level. It's taking part and being on a team that matters.
And then by now it's the end of July, so it has already hit the governor of North Carolina's desk. It's been vetoed. And it's coming back up in August, it looks like, early August for the veto override, so we'll see how it does. But I guess what caught my piqued my interest when I was listening to the podcast was um, women's athletics, and she had some personal experiences, and then her take on the bill itself was interesting to me because she disagreed with the bill, yet she had been involved in sports athletics with women who were taking steroids, I guess.
Right. So she was an Olympian in the Montreal Olympics in 1976. And she actually, so at the time, the East Germans were, the East German swimmer, she was a swimmer, and they were taking all kinds of steroids, which they didn't even necessarily know about, some of them. It was just part of the East German program. And it gave the East Germans a huge competitive advantage over the women who were not on steroids.
And what's also really interesting about that is you saw this gaping hole in the bill. Like, you knew that this bill sounded good, I guess, in name only, and you're like, yeah, it has an omission. Like, women can still like, did they pull out men from the sport or something like that? Maybe you can explain it a little bit better. But in the end, like, I could still be on roids competing against you, spike a volleyball in your face, cause critical injury. So it wasn't like, it didn't solve all the problems. And so we talked about how should a lawmaker actually solve these problems, because there definitely are problems when men are involved in women's sports, whether they're trans or if it's just co-ed. How do we get these lawmakers to actually solve problems? Would you tell them to leave it alone, like not even try to legislate? But Mori specifically says, I have to work the rest of my life because I didn't win a medal. She says something to that effect in this interview with Don Vaughn. And so she definitely has like bitter feelings about it, but yet she's like, I didn't like the bill. I think it was filled, it was written by hate-filled people, or there was a lot of hate in there or something to that effect. And she just felt like it attacked like the trans community. Did you feel like any of that was accurate?
I think the people who wrote the bill are motivated to protect women, but the bill doesn't protect women, and then it does strange things with protecting men's sports because of the way the bill was written. So in men's sports, it would prevent a trans man from competing as a man. A trans man does not have a competitive advantage over men. It doesn't make sense
Right.
that you would protect cis men from trans men, because biological men have advantages other than testosterone. They have structural advantages with their hips. They have structural advantages. Even their red blood cell count is higher by nature. So those protections aren't in there. So it's very strange. And then the way the bill is written, currently athletes, so I have asthma, for example, I'm allowed to take albuterol because I'm diagnosed with asthma. It's not clear how trans men, the way the bill is written, could potentially have to compete against women. And they'd have the same problem Mori had. So there are problems with the bill, but currently, I mean, the problem is always the same problem. The problem is that we have public schools and they're overregulated and they're not controlled by markets and they're controlled by government. So you have the state legislature, which is their job to control the public school system, controlling it, and they just don't do a good job. The strange thing is a libertarian for me about what Mori's saying. It's everything her answer is that centralization. So she wants somebody higher to control, like abortion. She talks about abortion in this interview, and she wants the federal government to decide, not North Carolina. So she's always going higher. And
Wait, she does that because the majority of North Carolina won't take the Democrat side, right?
Right.
She doesn't have the majority when it comes to the state. So she would rely on the federal. She feels like that's more left-leaning, the politics at the federal level. And were you going to give another example?
Well, with guns,
Yeah.
she's very much against the Second Amendment. She doesn't trust your ability to decide whether you can
She
carry
would
a
never
gun.
tell you that. She would tell you she's for gun safety. See how it's the magic words. You can actually like picture them sparkle when a Democrat says them. Like, who's not for gun safety?
Right. I actually think it's funny because all the people that I know are for gun safety have a lot of guns, and all the people who keep talking about being for gun safety don't seem to have any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she, another thing that stood out was she kind of sounded libertarian-esque when she referred to the Fairness in Women's Sports Bill, saying, you know, let's leave these decisions to the governing organizations. I think in this sports case, I guess it was NC High School Athletic Association, I believe. And I haven't had time to dig into how they actually are vetting candidates. The last time I registered a kid in high school sports, it was like paperwork, but I don't know how they dug into sex and drugs and, you know, your ability on this playing field. You know what I mean? So I don't even know if they do anything in that regard. But yeah, she was like, let's leave it to these other entities. Let's not have the legislature decide. But yeah, and then she flipped on the abortion issue. She was like, let's have the federal government decide the abortion
Yeah.
issue. But then she's like, I'm also for gun safety, but no one will give me a hearing on my gun ideas, you know, my safety ideas. So she's kind of like all over the place.
Well, I think she is. I mean, she has the Democratic agenda. I mean, Republicans do this too. They've got their agenda, and then they're for whatever set of principles suit them at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So if the federal government agrees with them, then they think the federal government should make the decisions. Right?
Sure.
So I think that's kind of what's going on with this. But yeah, it was a problematic interview if you actually think about what she's saying and her reasoning.
Do you think she's in any ways libertarian, even though she does make the comments about, yeah, we should stay out of it. The government should stay out of it. Let's get politics aside. Let's put politics to the side.
No, she's not libertarian at all. That's just some kind of, dog whistle that they're saying because she doesn't want the government out of it. She wants the North Carolina state legislature out of it, which has a supermajority of Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't want the federal government out of it. Right.
Right. She just wants
Yeah.
her team involved in the decision making, and she's not getting what she wants because she's in the minority, I guess, right now, or
Yes.
her party is in the minority. So what else? Did anything else pop out in that interview? I know you talked about the Montreal Olympics and the structural differences in the track and field, and like you mentioned your own personal experience with track and field, how anyone could probably join track, the albuterol, I don't know.
Oh, so I mean, so as far as competition goes, when I talk to a lot of women, the reason the thing that I think should be happening is we should have women's sports, which is just very standard women who aren't having issue, who are not trans, and protect that group, and then have an open group. And the reason I thought this was because when I was running cross country and track, and even I've talked to soccer players, there's frequently women who would like to train with men, and especially in the lower ages, compete with men. The differences between men and women aren't profound until the guys start hitting puberty.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, women can benefit greatly from competing with men.
And did you write something about this?
I did. I wrote a paper, and it's on the Libertarian Party of North Carolina's website. It is called "There is No Need to Protect Men from Trans Athletes."
What do you think is going to happen with this bill? I guess August 7th, it's coming back up for an override?
August 7th, I think it's just going to pass. I don't think they're going to make the changes that they should make. I do think it is a problematic bill, but what we have currently is also problematic. I don't think it was very well thought through, but it is going to go through. The government does a lot of things that aren't ideal.
Even though they only had like 50% plus one, was that what you were saying earlier?
No.
And now they'll need 66% to override?
They need 60% to override, and they had 31, which is more than 6, so that would be 62%.
Okay, so that's how you came to this conclusion it should pass.
Yeah,
unless somebody flips.
So I don't think there's going to be flips in this case. And the reason I don't think that is because it was really clear that this was always going to be a Cooper override. We've seen flips in other bills, but in those cases, Cooper hadn't made it clear he was going to override them. I think it was always clear that Cooper was going to override this bill, and some people just feel there's a few Democrats out there who are just supporting the bill, so it's going to pass.
This bill, if it does get through the veto and is overridden, it does allow for these there will be trans athletes that will not be allowed to participate, right? But it sets them up for the ability to sue, I guess. I think a lawsuit was allowed in there.
Right. So it's kind of inconceivable that they're going to allow trans men to compete in women's sports. And they will not let trans men compete in men's sports the way that the bill is written. Because of that, they have this suing provision, and it is going to open up a lot of lawsuits. There's a lot of trans men out there who are on steroids, and they're going to have every right to sue the government of North Carolina, and I think it's just going to be a mess. So this isn't over, but it's going to end up being expensive and going through the court system.
And who do you think pays for that?
We all do. It's your tax dollars work. You think your tax dollars are helping people, but they're actually fighting trans men, apparently, to prevent them from competing in sports.
So if Rep. Mori was listening, I guess before the override or today, what message would we have for her as libertarians?
I think the message would be that these decisions should be done on a smaller level by a market, and we shouldn't be having public schooling making these decisions. I mean, the problem is we're having these culture wars over public schools because we have so much money. I mean, it's about 50% of your tax dollars in North Carolina go to public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So if everybody in North Carolina who pays taxes or has a child has a vested interest in the public school system, and we're getting culture war after culture war because this isn't a market and this isn't being designed to, the decisions aren't being made by individuals.
Is there a libertarian position on all these culture war issues?
No.
There's not. There's nothing in our party platform or whatever, our principal papers.
If you get the government out of these decisions, then the culture wars end. And if you want one thing for your family, you decide it. If I want something else, I decide that. Like, the whole argument goes away, and we can end the culture wars if we end government involvement.
Do you think like people on the right and left are being like abused with these culture wars right now? They're just being pulled one direction back and forth, like with the CRT, the trans issues, the books in the little public school libraries.
Yes,
like they stay in these wars, and people show up to the school board meetings, and you see, viral videos, but is it all for naught? I guess basically they're just being used by their party, maybe.
I think they are, because they're not coming to common sense decisions. I mean, if you look at one of the books you're referring to is Genderqueer. Nobody's saying Genderqueer should be banned. Nobody's saying there's people who shouldn't read it. What we're saying is it's in libraries, public school libraries, where parents, I have children in public school. We can't get into those libraries. During COVID, I couldn't even get into the school. So your kid goes to a school and you don't know that your kid's bringing home this book, which I actually would classify as pornography. And I don't think that it is. I don't think it should be in the school library where you don't have parents. That's the distinction. I actually don't have a problem with the same books in the public library, because in that library I go in with my kids, I have them use my card, I can see what they checked out. Mm-hmm. So the transparency isn't there in the public school.
Right. I don't think they would agree with you on that. I think they would say, yeah, we are transparent. You can see the books when they come home in the kid's backpack,
You can't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're being sneaky and devious, you're never going to see it. The kid's going to read it, maybe never bring it home. But yeah, I don't know why. This has always been the way, I think. Even with my own kid, I don't think I had access to what she checked out. And yeah, that's very problematic.
It's very strange. And in this day and age, I can't even get access to the library catalog, which is obviously online, but they don't give parents access to the library catalog in the public school. In the public library, I have access to all of Wake County's catalog, and I can by the way, these books are in that library, which is fine with me. But the idea that they're in a school where I don't get to see what's going on is problematic for me.
Yeah, the schools need to do a lot to improve. All right, any final last words?
Nope, just the Solutions Liberty, not this.
And she's not a libertarian.
No, she's not a libertarian.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to the interview segment of the podcast. My name is Ryan Brown. Tonight I'll be interviewing Mike Maat. Mike is a Virginia Libertarian, and he is currently running for President of the United States under the Libertarian ticket. So, Mike, if you want to take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. First of all, it's a joy to be with you North Carolinians again. And this time remotely. I didn't have to travel an inch to be with you this time, so it's all good. Yeah, you got it right. I am seeking the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. As your audience may know, I've been at this for a number of months now, going on, well, over a year now, since Reno. My background is in public policy and public service. I've had a couple of different careers in that direction and feel that it's one of the reasons why I think that I can put together the kind of campaign that the party needs. As we all recognize, we have a huge opportunity in 2024 as a Libertarian Party and as libertarians and libertarianism with a lowercase l as well. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think we all well understand why it is that we have that opportunity. In no small part, it's because the Republican and the Democratic parties have left behind their previous policy agenda of a generation ago and now seek nothing more than to just keep the other side out of power. And this is what has led to and continues to contribute to a growing sense of authoritarianism from our federal government. And so I think it's more important than ever before, and we have a greater opportunity than ever before to play a real major role in American politics. But to do that, we have to run a certain kind of campaign. And that means not just running a candidate with a public service and public policy background, but running on a platform of the most transformational ideas. We need to lean hard into our libertarian principles in order to completely differentiate ourselves from Republicans and Democrats. I believe that that's a mistake that we have made in the past, that our presidential candidates have not sufficiently differentiated from other parties. We have to remember that our job is not to seek common ground with Republican and Democratic politicians. It's to seek common ground with Republican and Democratic voters and to differentiate ourselves from their politicians. And we need to do that in a bold, unapologetically libertarian way, in a stark way that cleaves hard edges against the other parties. And that's not only because it's the right way to spread our message and to brand ourselves the way that we want the party to be branded, but I also think it's the best move strategically in order to get the most attention from the media, from donors, and from voters. We have to convince people that we represent a very, very different choice from the other parties. That's the kind of campaign that we've been putting together now. And we're going to continue to be putting together that type of campaign that I think the party will be proud of and that will really play a major, major role in American politics starting next May.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned you've been at it for a couple of months. You've been to North Carolina a couple times, last fall and then this spring at our convention.
That's right.
I'm sure we'll see a little bit more of you in the coming year and a half or so.
You can't get rid of me.
Nope, but we wouldn't want to. But thank you for the intro, and let's just dive right in. You sort of touched on it on your intro, but we are facing a uniparty that is nothing if not very good at driving people apart to consolidate their own power. Yet we as a party can't seem to avoid falling back into the old patterns of infighting, and it feels like this has gotten worse with some of the social media avenues that we're using. How do you plan to unify the party and refocus that energy on places where we can be productive?
A couple of different ways. First of all, I don't believe our party is quite at each other's throats as social media might lead you to believe. Having traveled around a number of conventions now, having been in half the states already just in the last few months, including North Carolina, I can tell you that social media is not a completely accurate representation of how people actually get along inside of our party. That is not to say that we don't, we don't have problems, because we do. I'm not trying to dismiss your question. I just want to point out that we need to be careful not to exaggerate it as well. I think that the rift came from, the way certain things were handled. Yes, absolutely. But I do believe that as a party, we all have our eye on an objective which we share in large part, and that is to run a successful national campaign. We, I think, as a party, agree that we need to run on a bold platform, that we need to be unapologetic and uncompromising about it, particularly in comparison to the past cycles. So I believe the answer to your question is, number one, running the kind of campaign that we can all be proud of, whether you're from this caucus or that caucus, or the left side of the party, the right side of the party, whether you're from Chicago or Los Angeles or New York or Alabama or Florida. I think that the kind of party that we're, the kind of campaign that we're putting together is one that we're all going to, share an interest. We're going to run a very professional campaign, and one on a very bold platform. The other thing that needs to be said is that our campaign itself has people from all over different types of the party itself. We have people from a couple of different caucuses, people that don't participate in any caucuses at all on our professional staff. We have 14 people that are part-time or full-time paid to be on our staff, and another dozen or so on our advisory panel, and then a lot of volunteers on top of that. And a lot of them are, in one caucus, some of them are in another caucus, and a lot of them are not in any caucus at all. Some of them would characterize themselves as coming from the left side of the party, and some from more the right side of the party. And like any group of libertarians, it's sometimes a food fight when we get together. I won't deny that. But we do all have our eye on an important prize, and that's not just merely securing the nomination, but differentiating ourselves in a bold way from the Republicans and the Democrats come next year. So I'm actually quite optimistic about it. I don't worry about it as much as I think about it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's good. If we could all get together and focus on defeating the state and getting our freedom back, it might be a little better than some of the inter-party drama we got going on. Even though,
and I think we do. We get mad at each other sometimes because we can't always agree in the finest of details about how.
Yeah.
But in the big picture, I think that we're all generally rowing in the same direction. We just, our cadence is off.
Yeah, absolutely. We love to delve deep into the minutia and the philosophy. But I'll pivot that into the next question. That philosophy and minutia doesn't always resonate with the average voter, particularly when we miss the connection between the kitchen table issues and how we approach the solution.
Yeah.
So how will you drive effective libertarian messaging that appeals to the people who are unfamiliar or misinformed with our views?
I would say there's two or three things in particular to bear in mind. In the big picture, I think it is true that most Americans have a libertarian streak. So philosophically, I'm not blowing off your question. We will get to the kitchen table Q&A in just a moment, but I want to add that philosophically, at the 30,000 foot level, I think most Americans have a bit of a libertarian streak, that they recognize that the parties have grown more authoritarian. And so I think that there's going to be more people open to our messaging than ever before. Polling data, for example, shows that half the United States is looking for a third party, not just supportive, but really, really open to a third party. And of course, the Republicans and the Democrats open themselves up to the potential that we can provide, because their leadership is this is a family show. How do I say this? Terrible. So, we're going to have an ear right away. To your point, I think that the economic issues are going to rise to the top come next spring in a way that they have been in the background up until now, but I think that they're going to be top-notch, top drawer after the first of the year as people start to focus on the election. So I think that there will be even more focus on inflation, for example, which is going to give us an opportunity to point out that the way that monetary policy is controlled in the United States is messed up at a very fundamental level, at an institutional level, that it doesn't matter so much whether you replace the leadership with a Republican or with a Democrat. We've done that cycle after cycle after cycle, and still we have a problem with inflation that keeps coming back. You know, this is not a new thing the last few years. It's a recurring problem. And so I think that most Americans, while they may not recognize, you know, what the Federal Reserve System is all about, when we as libertarians talk about we want to sunset the Fed, we want to replace it with a rules-based system, we have a plan to do that, here's all the details, I think what most Americans are going to hear is something scary, right? But I think that they will be open to the idea, first of all, of an economist talking about it can be done in order to make us more safe, not less safe, to make our currency harder, not softer, impose a rules-based system, because the Fed, best efforts, well-meaning people, smart people notwithstanding, they have not been able to live up to the mandate that we have given them for 100 years. And so we need to try something different, but not wacky different, but less wacky, take away their discretion and impose a rules-based system. Just that's one example. I also think that people are going to be much more open to the idea that our federal government has been wasting money, that you cannot trust a government that finds it in its own interest to spend all kinds of money immediately after shutting down huge parts of our economy in order to try to buy off your affection, having screwed up your way of life. This is not the type of government that you want going forward. As much as many Americans have put in the rearview mirror the COVID crisis, right? A lot of Americans have moved on. We're no longer afraid of the disease. The economy has opened up again. A lot of Americans have forgotten and forgiven. Well, my view is that many Americans have forgiven, but the forgetting takes a lot longer, and the lessons to be learned, Americans are still open to hearing. So when you hear a Republican or a Democrat talk about the green economy coming and the trillions of dollars that your government wants to spend of your money in order to force a certain system of how they want you to react to changes in the climate, for example, do you really want the type of government in charge that shut down our economy in order to prevent the spread of COVID? And by the way, did so in a fashion that kept information from you about the disease, about the development of vaccines, about the efficacy of vaccines? Is this really a governmental system that you can trust with trillions of dollars for the next crisis? And then the other thing, Ryan, I would hasten to add is that I do believe that Americans are open more than ever before to a real robust anti-war message. I think RFK Jr. is demonstrating that people have their ears open to this in the Democratic Party, but I also believe that people will in the Republican Party. I think it's one of the things that people point to about Donald Trump that they find least distasteful about him, right? There's much about him that are fairly revolting, but a lot of folks on the Republican side point to Donald Trump and say, look, he's, you know, this is a guy who's kept us out of wars. And I think that that's a real bellwether that signals that people are going to be open to our message much more than ever before. And so that's, you know, partially a kitchen table issue in the sense that it controls taxes, keeps your taxes down if we stop spending money so willy-nilly. But I believe it's also true that people sit around the kitchen table and are starting to realize that the simple dignity of being able to be represented by a foreign policy that reflects your values has been taken from you. You no longer have a government that engages with the rest of the world in a way that reflects how you see the world, reflects your ethics. I think that that's a fairly down-to-earth message and a fairly down-to-earth problem that most Americans resent.
Absolutely, yeah. If you look at the stuff in Ukraine, we're spending billions of dollars with just presidential authority. We're fighting wars all over the place.
Hundreds of billions.
Hundreds of billions. And we're fighting wars all over the place using a, authorization of the use of military force that's over 20 years old. And for completely
Well,
different
you're
purpose.
exactly right. And it's administratively messed up, to your point, the 20-year-old authorization. It's ethically messed up. It's fiscally messed up. And by the way, if you don't care about money or ethics or good government, let's say you're someone that doesn't care about those three, just empirically speaking, just objectively, you have to admit that while the United States military is very good at a tactical level, we're very good at blowing things up, killing people, moving material, taking land, holding land, opening seaways, keeping seaways open. We're even good at toppling governments, if you don't mind that the secrets will eventually come out. We're very good at all these tactical things. But we, empirically, objectively speaking, are not good at a strategic level. We're not doing things that the American public would point to and say, yeah, it cost us $1 trillion. It cost hundreds of thousands of foreign national lives, but it was a good idea anyway.
Yeah,
That is not a conversation that's happening. As far as long-term strategic victories go, we stink.
Yeah, I hate to
And
use,
that's a hard thing to swallow.
Yeah, I hate to use the word investment when it comes to government spending, but the return on this quote investment has been horrible globally
Absolutely
for the last
horrible
70,
and
80 years.
Yeah, and arguably negative, to your point.
Yeah.
That's well said.
Right, and that government who's so good at killing people and moving things around, but not quite good at getting solutions. We really don't want them to be in charge of the green policy, as you said, right? Especially when they have the ethics.
That's exactly right. You don't want them in charge of controlling your money to react to climate change. However you feel about climate change, however you feel about its cause, how much there's going to be, what we should do about it. The one thing we should all agree on is you do not want a Republican or a Democrat making that decision for you. Yeah. Holy cow. You may not agree with anybody on your block about what to do about Taiwan. But the one thing that we should agree on is that if a Republican and a Democrat are in charge of our policy toward China and their internal problems or their problems with Taiwan, whether you characterize that as internal or not, that is a messed up situation. That is one step toward a war.
Absolutely. With the good old statement about bipartisanship, watch your wallet. So,
watch your wallet.
Yeah.
It's the one thing they agree on.
Exactly. So we'll pivot a little bit, and I know you touched on some of them, but what are your 3 big issues that you want to communicate to the people, and why do you have those issues?
I believe that they, you're right. We have been touching on them. I believe that they will come back to economic issues. I believe that government spending, military interventionism, and inflation are going to be potentially the top 3. Obviously, we are going to have to roll a little bit because we don't know whether there's going to be we know there's going to be a crisis. We just don't know what it's going to look like, right? Come next year. So we're going to have to be flexible and roll, but that's my expectation. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that there are issues that are not necessarily under the purview of a president, under the executive branch of the federal government of the United States, that are nonetheless important. So, for example, I think it's important to point out that as libertarians, we believe not only in school choice, but the decentralization of power. We believe that school boards should be controlled by their localities, by parents in particular. It's one of the reasons why we do believe in school choice, so the parents can control how it is that their children are educated. Standing up for those principles is important, even if it's not per se a presidential issue. It can still become one just because the national debate could go one direction or another. And I personally believe not only that we should engage that, but it is, our crappy public schools, and the fact that they are crappy because of the way that the financing is structured, right? That is not a coincidence. That set of issues is as important as any. That is a war and peace level, financial collapse of the federal government level problem, that our public education system stinks. And I don't think that we should shy away from that, but I cannot predict whether people are going to be, engaging that as robustly as we were, say, when the Virginia gubernatorial race was a couple of years ago, when it was so important. The other, Ryan, the other issue that does come up from time to time, and hard to predict exactly when, of course, is immigration, because the Republicans and the Democrats seem to have found different ways of turning that into a mess, which I find not entertaining, but wholly interesting. It's just interesting because it presents economic problems, humanitarian problems, ethical problems, and problems of foreign affairs, as well as cultural problems. So it's a multi-headed issue, and we need to be ready to engage that as well.
Well, cool. Yeah, you said some things don't necessarily fall under the purview of president, and I'd like to follow on that with a little bit. We would all love to see a libertarian in the White House, but we're also realistic about the chances of winning. So it's very unlikely that we will win this cycle. But if you win the LP nomination, what do you think a successful campaign looks like to you? Because you can always touch on some of those things that aren't necessarily under your purview.
You absolutely can. And by the way, one of those issues that we should be pushing instead of waiting to be pulled, if there's a push issue instead of a pull issue, it's criminal justice reform, for example. As a recent former police officer, I spent a lot of time talking about reforming not only criminal justice generally, but specifically how we manage law enforcement. And I think that that's one of those issues that is worth pushing, not only because it's ethically important, it's important to our development as Americans culturally, but it's also a big differentiator from Republicans and Democrats, where you have a lot of Democrats saying still, fewer than a couple years ago, but you still have Democrats espousing certain versions of defund the police, which strikes me as throwing up your hands and saying, reform is too hard, it's too complicated, I can't deal with it. I just would rather be positioned as hating all cops. Or on the Republican side, back the blue in all cases, right? Which is equally stupid. I'm a police officer myself, and I never said anything that dumb. So it's a good differentiator for us, even if it's not the hottest topic. It's a good differentiator for us because it signals where we are ethically and that we're willing to engage in reform and hard work. And whereas some people would want to paint us as the less rational of the three parties, the truth of the matter is, especially illustrated by that particular issue, we are the rational ones. We're the ones that want to engage reform in a middle of the road sense, whereas the other two parties just find it too difficult, want to turn it into culture war type of issue and fail to get the job done. So in that sense, I think it's a push issue. To your point, you were saying that our chances of winning aren't all that great. I would suggest two thoughts. One is success looks like making people think that it's not impossible. Once you turn the corner, once you get to, remember Gary Johnson got 10% in polls. I don't remember exactly what he peaked out at, maybe 11% or something like this. That's quite a bit, before he got run out of town for forgetting what Aleppo was, right? That's quite a bit. We need to reach that and more in order to generate a feeling that we are a party that you better start paying attention to. Does that make sense? I don't know what that number is. I believe it's north of double digits. 15% is the traditional number to get into debates. Obviously, we don't know what debates are going to look like. Honestly, we don't even know that debates will exist. But for that reason, 15% has been a magic number in the past. And so that makes sense for the next target after double digits is getting to 15%. Remember that we're not going after 100%, right? We're not even going after 50%. We're in a three-way race, 37% wins.
Yep.
Right? 37% wins. I mean, obviously 33 and a half could win, but 37% does win.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the highest mark you could possibly shoot for. So if Gary Johnson, without differentiating from the other parties, right? I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican, socially liberal like a Democrat, Gary Johnson. If you can get to double digits in the polls with that message, just based on, a credible background in public service, good for him. I'm not trying to run him down. He's a nice guy. He does have a credible background in public service, but he did not make much effort to differentiate himself from the other parties. We can absolutely do better than that by presenting a different choice. And that's part of what success looks like as well, is creating a completely differentiated choice for people. And I think that will catapult us past the 15% mark. So having said that, let me add one more thought. Come May, when it's really boiled down to three, it'll be boiled down to Donald Trump or somebody else. Right now, it looks like probably Donald Trump. Looks like probably Joe Biden. No guarantee on that. If he's alive by next spring, right? Probably Joe Biden. No assurance. The idea of re-electing Donald Trump is strange. Not just because he's been indicted a number of times, but he's a strange guy. He's a populist, no philosophical underpinnings. Was a Democrat in New York in the 80s. I was in New York in the 80s. I've got a long history of reasons to not like Donald Trump. One of the things I find most disturbing is he was recently found civilly liable for a sexual assault. That I think should not be swept under the rug. That's a profoundly disturbing thing that happened. If that guy is reelected, that's a strange thing, and we should not lose sight of that. Similarly, Joe Biden, this is a guy who was not terribly bright 40 years ago. No ethical underpinnings, no philosophical underpinnings, not the kind of guy who you would ever want to have as president of the United States. Now, this guy, he's like my mother's age. I got gray hair and he's my mother's age, okay? That's a weird thing. Re-electing that guy would also be a strange thing. So what I'm trying to say is, one of three strange things is going to happen. Donald Trump is going to get reelected. That's strange. Joe Biden is going to be reelected. That would be strange. Or I, or another libertarian, is going to be elected. That would also be strange. But you get my point. It doesn't seem quite so strange in that context, does it?
Yeah, you getting elected is probably the least strange thing about that. But,
It seems strange now, but 2 months after the nomination, I'm going to look like Mr. Normal.
Absolutely. So, let's say we'll take from now until the nomination. And so what sets you apart and what makes you the best candidate for that nomination?
I think that I can represent the party in a way that is both unapologetically libertarian. In that sense, we're leading with what we call the Gold New Deal, right? People are increasingly familiar with it. They can read about it at goldnewdeal.org. The point of giving it its own URL and its own brand is our commitment to not backing off of it. We are running on it, with it, we're going to carry it with us, and we're going to let it carry us. We are running on an unapologetically policy forward campaign, principle forward campaign, the most transformational ideas, institutional level change. That's A. And B, we can do that in a way that makes the American public comfortable. Comfortable is probably not the right word, because we're going to say a lot of things that make people think real hard in an uncomfortable fashion for the first time in a while. But we can deliver a campaign that is professional, as we are proving as we go week by week on this, that has a candidate with a background in public service, as a police officer, before that decades long as an economist, including working for the White House and other international and federal agencies. People appreciate the experience and being able to explain it in a way that, having a background as a university professor helps. Being able to connect those dots, because the truth is, and I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's an is thing. The American public expects a candidate who they could at least imagine could go all the way, who has the background, who has the qualifications to go all the way. Because if you don't, they feel like, well, why am I paying attention? Right? Your philosophy could be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But, I know that my fellow Americans are not going to take you seriously. I'm not sure myself why I should take you seriously. And therefore, I don't have the time of day to listen to you and your philosophy. No offense, you could be, a wonderful person, but a lot of Americans still view this as a horse race among individuals. And so they need to see a professional campaign with a professional candidate.
Excellent. So after next convention, you've won the nomination. How do you go about differentiating yourself from Joe Biden and Donald Trump? One thing I can tell right now, you don't have dementia and you don't look like a Cheeto. So we're good there. But what are some other ways you can differentiate?
Okay, but it's only July, Ryan. Lots of things could happen between now and next year to any of the candidates, right?
That's true. You could get an awful spray tan, right?
All right, now that would be strange.
That would certainly be strange.
Yeah, those things are not going to happen. We are going to differentiate with our platform, with our ideas. We're going to be all the issues that we just talked about. We're going to lean into real hard. And tactically speaking, we're going to lean into the differences. And so, as opposed to, and I've talked about this a lot, and I know that this hurts some people's feelings, we are not going to plan on spending our money slowly over 6 months. We're going to go loud, hard, early. My own feeling is that if you have $500,000 in the bank at any one moment, you've made a mistake. You've got to spend that money as it comes in. Hard, national advertising, differentiated. I almost want to use the word obnoxious, right? I can use it with you. That's not the term I would use if I were speaking to an overall outside of the party type of crowd, but one that is not designed to make you feel like this is a campaign that reminds you of Republicans or Democrats. It's going to be designed to differentiate. We're going to find those wedge issues, and we're going to play on those fast, hard, loud to get the ball rolling. Remember, there's no point in flaming out over 6 months. If you're going to flame out, you might as well do it in 6 weeks, right? So the only way to really generate a path to victory, whatever you think victory looks like, even if you don't believe we can get to 37%, even if you only believe we can get to 15, even if you believe we can only get to 10, the path to victory has to run through a very bold, very differentiated, and very early advertising campaign.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a good place for us to stop here. We're going to put up some of our libertarian businesses in the state, and we're going to come back right after this with the panel for the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you guys. We're now on to the panel section where Mike Termott is back with us, Trevor Miles from Chowan County, and Joshua Glawson, our Strategic Communications Advisor out of Union County, join us for the panel. So we just had a good one-on-one discussion with Mike Termott, and I'm going to throw it over to Joshua Glawson as he's been listening on and has a question or two for Mike.
Hey, Mike, thank you very much for being on here.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, and I know you're up in Virginia right now, correct?
Yep, we've been up here, moved up here about 18 months ago from Florida. 20 years in Florida, back to Virginia.
Oh, are you originally from Florida?
No, but spent 20 years there until 18 months ago.
Nice. Okay, whereabouts in Florida were you?
South of well, in between, I was working in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami. Spent much of that time living just north of Fort Lauderdale, and about half the time living in Hollywood, which is between Fort Lauderdale and Miami.
Man, that's awesome. I love Florida. I had a great time down there. I spent about almost a month in Tampa, and made so many friends down there.
I love Tampa. I love Miami. Also, I love the Cuban culture, to be honest, and the Hispanic culture, even more generally in South Florida.
Absolutely. So I just want to know, are you bringing kind of like with that being in Florida for all those years, some of the maybe political ideologies and maybe some of the thoughts from Florida? I know that right now DeSantis is big out of Florida, and there's also been who are some of the others that have come out of there over the past few years?
Oh, Senator Scott. I mean, there's all kinds of people coming in and out of Florida, Republicans and Democrats. As you know, it's been a fairly contentious state between Republicans and Democrats over the past generation. In answer to your question regarding DeSantis, the shortcut answer is no. I know that there are a lot of people in our party that are Ron DeSantis fans. I'm not really one of them. And that's not, I don't think the guy is evil incarnate. I don't want to exaggerate this, but I do believe that he plays politics in a way that divides people, even in Florida, and does so for gratuitous reasons. It does so just for his own political gains. I don't like the idea of him telling school boards how to run themselves, irrespective of how you feel about what he ostensibly is trying to accomplish with school boards. I don't like the idea of him bossing school boards around. In that sense, I'm a big believer in decentralization, even if it means once in a while you're going to get a school board that behaves in a way that you don't like. It's just not appropriate for your governor to dictate this. I believe he knows that. I believe that he knows that the issues that he's pursuing are exaggerations in the minds of some Republicans. And so I think that he's just manipulating issues to his benefit. I similarly don't like some of the legislation that he has moved through the Republican legislature, talking about the way that he talks about trans issues, the way that he talks about LGBTQ issues is designed to divide us. And I think it gets real close to engaging the culture wars that I don't like in America through public policy. And I believe that as libertarians, we need to be, if we're on guard for nothing else, we need to be on guard for that. As much as we don't like war, as much as we don't like fiscal irresponsibility, we also must not like the idea of using public policy to engage culture war. And that's why I'm not a big fan of Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a fair answer. But as far as like your involvement in the police, what was that like? What was your position there? What was your affiliation with government in that role?
I was a police officer for 11 and a half years. I was on road patrol for the entire time, worked nights, worked evenings. Worked for a city in southern part of Broward County, a very active area in terms of crime. a very densely populated area, and an area that was extremely diverse in terms of any way that you want to measure diversity, culturally, racially, in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of high crime, low crime, in terms of different styles of education. However you want to measure diversity, this place was uber diverse. And in that sense, it was a very interesting place to work. Probably no matter what your career, what your job was, it would be an interesting place to work. I became a police officer around the time that I became a registered libertarian. I registered as a libertarian in 2010 or 11. I became a police officer in 2010 or 11 also. So I was on the road for 11 and a half years, all of it as a libertarian. And one of the things that I found is that most police officers have a real fervent libertarian streak. Most of the cops that I worked with were registered Republicans, but you do find that just like we all like to be mad at our boss, right? We all like to complain about our boss, the stupid things, you know, corporate did, or the stupid things the board is making us do. Imagine when you're a police officer, that takes the form of the stupid things the legislature did, or the stupid things that the city wants us to do. So for example, we used to have fairly robust debates about, look, fill in the blank, everything from qualified immunity to asset forfeiture. Our city eventually did stop asset forfeiture, at least put a pause on it. I don't know what their policy is right now. The war on drugs, I think most police officers recognize that it doesn't work. I think a lot of police officers, I don't have data to back me up on this, by the way, this is just anecdotal, but I think a lot of police officers would share our feeling that it's a very weird and unethical thing that the government would try to tell you what you can or cannot do with your body. I think that most police officers would fundamentally agree with that. I was lucky in the sense that the police department that I worked for was not tiny. We weren't huge, call it medium size. We had like 100 officers. And I didn't have to get involved, for example, with the war on drugs. I didn't have to be involved with civil asset forfeiture. So in that sense, I was able to dodge a couple of bullets that I was really interested in dodging as a libertarian. So that was a good thing. But it was, as you might imagine, uber educational from the standpoint of how people feel about certain things. And you also find that, and this is another thing that surprised me, was the extent to which police officers have enormous discretion over the handling of any one particular case.
Absolutely.
And so you learn that you are the last defense of the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
there's a lot of ability for the singular police officer to jump in and maybe make their own specific, you know, contribution to fighting the war on drugs. But it came up a couple times in the first two questions with DeSantis and the war on drugs. But DeSantis recently came out speaking against the First Step Act, one of the good things that Donald Trump did that would help end the war on drugs a little bit and give some grace to the people caught up in it. Trevor, I don't know if you want to step in on this one and talk a little bit about the war on drugs, the libertarian side of it.
Actually, I would love to jump in on this.
Excellent. So I'll let you speak to that.
Mike, you probably didn't realize it, but I'm also a cop. Now, granted, I was a cop for about 1/10 of the time that you were, so I don't have quite nearly as much experience with the whole thing. But I am curious. Sounds like your opinion on the war on drugs is pretty much the same as mine. It sounds like the experiences that you've had enforcing the war on drugs has been pretty much the same as mine. So how would you, if you got elected or whatever, how would you transition the country away from the war on drugs without shocking the public? Because I'm sure there will be members of the public that are just going to be like, how could you possibly let someone do cocaine? Why? You know. because I mean, we've all met those kind of people who are just like,
Right.
you want to put that in your body? Why?
Well, right. And I think that first of all, there's no silver bullet here. I have been accused from time to time of sounding like, this is fairly easy. I know the answers. Let me encapsulate it into 8 words for you. And if I say anything that leads you to believe I'm that dumb, I apologize. There is no one silver bullet, but there are several things that we can do and several things that need to be said. And I do think that you put your finger on it. It is a phase in, and it's a process of increasing everyone's comfort level as we go. Specifically, I think that ethically, we need to add, we are not pro-drug, right? In the same sense that we're not anti-vax when we talk about the evils of mandating that you have a vaccine. We're not pro-drug when we talk about the evils of prohibition. We're not pro-alcohol just because we don't think that there should be, okay, well, maybe Ryan is. But we're not pro-alcohol in the sense that, you know, we think that everyone should drink. That's not what we're saying, right? And I think that that's worth reiterating at the front. I remember I was watching television when Ron Paul famously said, I'll get this wrong, but paraphrasing, anybody in the audience would try heroin if it were legal, you know. No, of course not. Now, maybe that number isn't 0, and we need to be sensitive to the fact that that number may not be 0. There may still be adults in the United States who don't do things just because the government says it's a bad idea. I don't think that that number is very large. And I do think, importantly, just like we were talking about the subjective and empirical evidence that our foreign policy stinks, we need to lean into the fact that subjectively, empirically, our prosecution of the war on drugs has been an abysmal failure. The number of times that I have performed CPR on young men who are overdosing is a lot larger than the number of times I ever, you know, bumped into someone who was dealing in a substance that was going to hurt someone else. We are not helping people, and we do have to get good at helping people, because it is true that we have an addiction problem in the United States. We do have a drug problem in the United States. And we should not be in the business of sugarcoating that. We should not be in the business of saying, it's not that big a deal, just let it go, stop locking people in jail for it. That's not the logical sequence. The logical sequence is we need to stop doing what we're doing because we are not helping people that need to be helped. We need to treat drug addiction like the medical problem it is. And when you drive it underground, when you create black markets by making something illegal that the culture is not ready to give up, that's where black markets come from. That's what makes it so dangerous. The reason fentanyl is killing these people is not because fentanyl itself is so inherently dangerous, which it is. The reason it's killing people is because we have a fraud problem, a lack of control problem, a lack of trusted provider, a lack of branding problem. We have no above ground market. Black markets are dangerous. Black markets kill. And that's why people are dying from fentanyl overdosing and other overdosing, although fentanyl is the big one the last few years. So just empirically, I think that Americans are ready to hear, we need to do something different. If they're willing to hear, you know, it's the old saying, you know, they're not ready to hear what you know about unless they're already aware of what it is that you care about. We need to suggest to people, no, we do care about the drug addiction problem in the United States. Now, to your point about stepwise increasing people's comfortability, I think that we can all agree that the first step is making sure that we lock in the idea of decriminalizing marijuana at a federal level and through all the states. We're still not there yet. We need to lock that in. And when we do, just like coming off of the alcohol prohibition, people will get comfortable with the idea that this is something that we can live with and the world isn't going to fall apart over it. I believe that the next step is to go after drugs that are non-addictive for decriminalization. It'll be stepwise. It doesn't have to take decades, but it does have to take a little bit of time. And I think that you will see Americans gaining a comfort level. And as they do, it'll become more of an ethical second nature. Remember too, and this will probably sound crass, but speaking to you youngsters, I think I can get away with saying this. This is a generational issue. As our population shifts from being more populated by people like my peers toward being populated by people more like your peers, I'm trying not to say something as crass like, wait until my peers die off. But it is a generational issue. And over time, naturally, politically, it will grow into ethical second nature to say, it is weird, the idea that the government would tell you what you can and cannot do with your body. If we keep harping on that message and getting people comfortable with the real effects of how that policy plays out.
Yep. You mentioned the fact that government making something illegal doesn't always prevent someone from doing it, and that it is a generational issue. But I might be the only young libertarian who's never done any sort of marijuana at all, and know a couple people who are my parents' age to have done it. So don't it's not quite a general.
You're not the only one, Ryan. There are lots and lots out there. They just they don't always advertise it.
Yeah,
but take it from me. There are lots.
You're not the only one.
Absolutely.
I also have never tried marijuana.
So here we go. I'll transition this into another question here. So
what we really have is Josh is the only one on this podcast who has.
He has the right to not self-incriminate, But so I'll transition that. I'll ask it to members of the panel, and then I'll ask it to you, Mike, and I'll start. So if there were 3 agencies you could abolish within the first 100 days or so, I would probably say the ATF, because I might not care too much about tobacco, but I do love my firearms. And then the FBI, because they can't be trusted and they're off the rails. And then the DHS, because they have just they've jumped in and trampled our civil rights for the last, 20-something years now. So, yep. Joshua, if you had 3, what would you abolish and why?
Am I keeping a list here?
No.
You can choose your favorites later, or you can jump in with 3 new ones. But I'll let you clean it up.
Yeah, I think in North Carolina, I would definitely end the ABC. That's the control mechanism that controls our alcohol.
In Virginia too.
Yeah, it's just terrible. So we need to.
Now that's a weird one. You have to admit, love them or hate them, and I think everyone in each state hates them. But that is a weird setup. I think people coming from other states look at that and say, "What?"
Yep, absolutely. And it also stifles business in the state of North Carolina. So, because we have a lot of breweries that would like to make more beer, and they can't. They're limited by those laws. So I would get rid of that system. Secondly, I would also consider getting rid of TSA. So TSA. I know that one sounds kind of funny. But I kind of mean it.
Hey.
No, I like the TSA idea. Each one of these has something to argue for it, but I think for different reasons, if I may.
Yeah.
Trevor, did you want to put something on the list?
Yeah, Trevor, jump in. I'll ask you another question, Mike.
Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and hit you with my top 3. So ATF, DEA, IRS. First day.
There you go. That's pretty good. All right, Mike, I didn't mention it earlier, but you're free to ignore any question I ask and just answer with what you want. So I've done it to Rob, and Rob's on vacation, so
I won't do that to you.
It's the inmates running the asylum. So all right, I'll ask you either for your top 3, or I'll ask you where you were kind of going with that. If you want to speak on the principles that each of these stand on or trample on.
Yeah, now I've got 7 on the list, so let me go real quick. Something like the TSA is an interesting example because it's the easiest one to replace with a private sector security agency.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, in that sense, it wouldn't be that big a deal. I mean, you'd have to get the airlines on board and the airports themselves. The airlines are going to be the ones that ultimately finance it, but the airports are going to have to be the ones that implement it. You got to get them in a room and say, this is your 18-month heads up. We're going to sunset this piece of crap. You know, you do you, but you know, if you want some sense of security, the American public is going to expect a smooth transition. Get your act together. That would be a fairly easy one. The ATF is an interesting example because I find it the most starkly ethically offensive. In other words, there's very little to argue for the ATF's existence unless you really were per se an authoritarian. I mean, it's really nothing more than a revenue agent. Remember, it used to be in the Treasury Department. It's nothing more than a collection agency using weird ethics as a backdoor. I mean, that is really weird. They all have ethical problems, but that's the one that's most black and white. I think that it's a nice libertarian leaping off point. It's almost a talking point, right? It's almost like somebody put it together just for the purposes of making a libertarian argument. You know, let's just construct this to offend people. And of course, ABC is that way too. ABC also has the added benefit of creating a monopoly. So all economists will rally around getting rid of that thing. You know, economists represent 1/100th of 1% of the voting population. So that doesn't matter. But as an economist, anytime you create a monopoly, we naturally double over in pain. DHS, the argument for DHS being sunset, even though that's the most complicated one, right? If TSA is the easiest, DHS is the hardest. DHS, the argument for it is that it has the greatest impact financially, right? That's where a lot of the entitlement programs are run. We need to be able to go after the entitlement programs one at a time, not at the agency level, fortunately or unfortunately. And I believe one of the big ways you do that is through the Social Security Administration. You've got to be able to say, read my lips, Social Security is evil. The idea of forcing young people into a program that's going to guarantee them at best a crappy rate of return. And to your point, Ryan, it's not really an investment program, right? But we use the language of ROI. And at worst, no return at all. That is evil. And to do it for no other reason than to sucker them into financing previous generations, that is some sort of evil. We need to phase that out. Obviously, if you're 65, you're you're approaching retirement. We're not, we're not unethical ourselves. We're not going to pull the rug out from under you. But we need to create a way to phase out and give people options. And for the youngsters, we need to convince them you don't want to go into that at all. But the two that I would like to speak to, and then I got to add my third, which is not in your list. The reasons the FBI and the IRS are so important is because they represent, in a real fundamental sense, a problem with the relationship between us and the federal government. The reason I hate the IRS is not because the IRS is so inefficient and unethical, which it is, but that's not what bothers me about the IRS. What bothers me about the IRS is that it exists, that there is this financial relationship directly from the federal government to us. I find that problematic. Just at an institutional, at an ethical level, if a federal government wants money, if it needs money, and we can all argue about it doesn't need anything, but even if you convinced a bunch of libertarians the federal government needs some money because we're going to agree on national defense, albeit, a small fraction of what it is now, to the extent to which the federal government needs money and cannot raise it through user fees, it should go to state legislatures to get that money, because states can stand up to the federal government in a way that we can't. Anyone who's listening to your program who's been audited before knows that, as I have been. It's not a fair fight. It's a weird thing. And I think that having a direct financial relationship between individuals and the federal government is just inappropriate. The FBI is another example that's worth talking about for similar reasons. I find it inappropriate. My problem with the FBI is not that it stinks, which it does. My problem with the FBI is not that it has always stunk. It has always found itself incapable of staying out of political affairs. As I often say, there is no golden age of the FBI. There is no decade in the history of the FBI that you could point to and say, that's when they were doing a great job. They were not political. They only involved themselves in cases that they really had to. That's the decade we would want the modern FBI to emulate. There is no such decade. The real problem with the FBI is none of that. The real problem with the FBI is that it exists. We should not have a federal law enforcement agency because we should not have federal criminalization. That should be up to the states. Now, to the extent to which you believe that there is an anti-espionage functionality that we need in the federal government, and by the way, that's an argument, okay? But let's say that you convince yourself that that is a function that needs to be fulfilled. That should be in the Defense Department, in my view. Now, that's not to say the Defense Department hasn't been politicized, because it has, but at least it's not as political as the FBI. And structurally, it's set up for a particular purpose. It's not set up in a way that allows it to just make decisions of a political nature. The stuff that is political in the FBI needs to be sunset completely. That doesn't get spun off to another agency. And then all the stuff that the FBI does, which is the majority of it, by the way, that fights crime that's illegal in every state, the FBI doesn't need to do. State agencies can pick that up. So in other words, I would break up the FBI, put it into different places and get rid of it lock, stock, and barrel. But it's because it shouldn't exist. It's just an indication of a real bad relationship between us and our government. So that's why I would get rid of the FBI. The one I want to add to the list is the Federal Reserve System. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard, as John Kennedy used to say. Getting rid of the Fed is important. It's a big project. You don't get rid of the Fed just by standing on the balcony and shouting, "End the Fed." It just doesn't happen. The Fed is a very, very powerful political player in Washington. You need to break it up into pieces. You need to winnow down its political power so you can get rid of those pieces one by one and then sunset the agency completely. So that means taking away the discretion it has over monetary policy, replacing it with a rules-based system. It means making its regulatory function completely optional. It's largely optional now. Most banks can opt out of Fed regulation, but you want all banks to be able to opt out of that. And by the way, parenthetically, I would make all bank regulation optional so that a bank didn't have to be regulated if it doesn't want to. I don't think very many banks would choose to be completely unregulated, but some might. Some might hire a private accounting firm to do a deeper dive and not need Fed regulation. And number three, I would take away the Fed's balance sheet, transfer it to the Treasury Department, and subject it to federal legislation to end this midnight bailout crap. That's not a silver bullet either. We all know the federal legislature can do stupid things and does do stupid things, but at least it would slow down the process a little bit. And those are the big three things that we don't want the Fed to be doing anymore. And as we know, you can't get rid of an agency until you make it politically impotent. So this is a multi-year project, but that's how you'd have to go at it. And the reason it's so important is, of course, that the Fed is always expanding its power. And the idea of issuing its own cryptocurrency next year is just the latest version. We absolutely need to throw ourselves on the railroad tracks to stop that.
Absolutely.
And one of the ways you can do that is by threatening it. Number one, right out of the box, if you people don't play nice, I'm going to start going after your powers. We're going to do that anyway, but you've got to clip back its political wings. So I would put the Fed on that list. As difficult as it is, I think it's really important.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you said, the FBI has been corrupt basically from the start, but in the last 7 or so years, people have really seen it. And I think that's just now we're getting to the point where people could say, okay, we can get rid of the FBI. They might back the blue no matter who, but they at least see that maybe we can get rid of the FBI.
I think you're right, Ryan. I think even the back the blue crowd would be open to, and maybe that's the way to spin it for a Republican. Yeah. You want to get rid of the FBI and trust your local police departments more because you have more control over your local police and your state police than you do over the FBI.
All right, so we've been heavy on policy all night. We've been heavy on the business. Now I'm going to transition to a wholly manufactured controversy inside the Libertarian Party of North Carolina.
Okay.
What is better for home defense? A pistol, a 12-gauge shotgun, or an AR-15? And I'll start with Joshua, and then Trevor, and then we'll go to Mike.
Okay, I guess I really don't know enough about guns. I would like to know more about guns. I'll go ahead and preface with that, but I'd say a pistol.
There you go. We'll get you shooting soon. Trevor, go ahead.
Oh boy. Oh, sorry, I'm a gun nut. Let me think about that for a second. So currently I own both a handgun that I carry out in public for my own personal defense. And I inherited a 20-gauge shotgun that was made in like 1946. I'd be very trepidatious to actually shoot it, but I guess if I had to, I would. But since my pistol sits on my nightstand at night, I guess that would be the first thing that I grabbed if someone tried to enter my home without my consent.
That's a good answer. All right, Mike, what you got?
I should preface this by saying I'm a big shotgun guy, and so I'm biased. Even as a cop, I always carried a shotgun instead of an AR, just because I was trained on a shotgun coming out. So I might be a little bit biased, but I know that ARs are extremely easy to use. And so I don't want to discourage anyone from going down that route. Having said that, there's two different circumstances. If you believe that the zombie apocalypse is coming, and I'm not saying it's not, post-nuclear Armageddon, you need a shotgun. And I don't mean with birdshot. And by the way, you need two shotguns like I do, one in the closet and one above the kitchen cabinets.
All right.
The only problem with above the kitchen cabinets is my wife can't get there without the step ladder. But honestly, my 115-pound wife is going to be sent to the back of the kitchen with that bad boy anyway if she pulls the trigger. Having said that, for most applications, pistol all day long, and here's why. Most people have two problems with a home invasion or other potential problem around the house. One is target acquisition. You really want to make sure you know what you're doing. And the other one is you want to make sure you're legal because the courts are going against us these days. You guys don't need a lecture on the extent to which prosecutors have been making it very difficult to defend yourself. So in that sense, if you're shooting someone farther away than what a pistol will take care of, I worry about the legal sand shifting from underneath your feet. And the other one is you don't want your weapon taken away from you, right? And for most people, carrying a long gun inside of a room and there's a bad guy in that same room, they used to say if someone's within 20 feet of you and you're not already engaged in moving toward pulling the trigger, you're at a deficit because someone can close that gap so quickly on you, you don't pull the trigger in time, they're on top of your long gun, and a pistol is going to be easier to manage. You can open a door carrying a pistol. You can go around corners more safely carrying a pistol. So for inside the house, I like the pistol. I like Trevor's idea of being able to reach it on the nightstand.
All right. Well, I'm going to say you're all wrong. And the correct position for your AR-15 is right next to your nightstand, with a flashlight on it and a red dot. And if that guy is still dumb enough to come through the door looking at that, then you're wholly justified. You shouldn't be needing to move out too far out of your room anyways.
Agreed, 100%. I like that answer.
You're not clearing the house, you're defending it. So just sit in the bedroom and line up on them. All right, but all right, everyone answered wrong, so that's 3 strikes, and we are done the podcast. But so I'll go around the horn one more time. You guys can give an outro of yourself, and I'll finish with Mike again, so you can get the prime spot. But Josh, if you wanted to tell us what you're involved in, where you are, where we can find you, everything, take it away.
Yeah, my name is Joshua D. Glawson, and my friends, you guys can call me Josh. They call me Schwa on the streets. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, so yeah, go to joshuadglawson.com and you can find more of my writing. I am a writer in politics, philosophy, economics, finance, and personal development. So yeah.
Thank you, Josh. Trevor.
Yes, so my name is Trevor Miles. I'm trying to think. I got a lot of stuff that I've been doing. I'm a at-large board member for the Classical Liberal Caucus now. I got elected on Saturday, so first time ever being on a board for anything. This will be fun, I think. I also do state coordination for North and South Carolina with them, and in what little bit of free time I do end up having, I like to write articles on religion and classical liberalism and public policy and how those tend to intersect.
Excellent, thank you. And I know you are in Chowan County, and if there's any libertarians in North Carolina and Chowan County or around, I am sure that Trevor would love to hang out with you guys and maybe start an affiliate. All right, Mike, tell us where we can find you. Tell us all about yourself.
Well, I'm not going to crush the soul of your viewers by telling them all about myself. That sounds like a horrible way to spend the last 3 minutes of your program. But you can go to MikeTermott.com. You'd have to spell it right and put 2 A's in Termott. You can go to goldnewdeal.org, which is easier to spell. Don't go to goldnewdeal.com because that's the wrong website. It's not a bad idea, but they will try to sell you something. Go to goldnewdeal.org. Trevor, thank you for serving the Classical Liberal Caucus as a board member. I think that that's terrific. I think I'm glad that I didn't know that you guys are writers about philosophy, having been raised by a Lutheran and by a Calvinist. I have had it up to here with philosophical arguments inside of my family, and figure I still have another at least 35 years to go of that. But someday we can talk about the virtues of having faith and free will. And on the other hand, maybe we shouldn't talk about that. My personal contact information is listed at MikeTermott.com. So if there's anyone out there that just can't get enough of what we've been talking about, drop me an email, drop me a text. You can give me a call on the phone, but I probably won't recognize your phone number if we don't already know each other. So give me a text first and I'll call you back. But my real contact information is there, and I encourage everyone to reach out, learn more about the campaign. Everyone wants to get involved in the campaign. We would love to have you. There's all kinds of ways of getting involved. And so I encourage everyone to do that. It's a very fun campaign, a very dynamic campaign, very professional, and worth getting involved in.
Excellent, Mike. You have always been good to us in North Carolina. So I hope you enjoyed your time here, and we look forward to seeing you later throughout the next year and a half while you're running.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a great joy to be with you tonight, and always a great joy to be with North Carolinians.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Mm-hmm.